Today, I'm going to talk about my top 7 tips for how to improve your speaking skills in front of others. Let's dive right into it. Tip number 1, play around with your communication style. What does this mean? Your communication style is really the preferences that you have for how you speak. It's the body language that you use, the word choice that you use, the style, the grammar, the tone. All of that combined is your communication style. Have you ever noticed that some people naturally tend to sound very uncertain? Other people naturally tend to sound a lot more authoritative. Some people naturally use the same words over and over and over. For example, they might say so in the middle of every sentence. All of that combined is your communication style. What most people don't realize is that you can actually change it. It's malleable. It is up for grabs and it is up to you how you'd like to communicate. So if you are someone who tends to be a little bit more uncertain, who hesitates, who perhaps ends the sentence on a higher note, sounding less confident, that is something that you can change. And that is a type of style that you can modify. But the key to this is really playing with your style, seeing what you like, what you don't like, what resonates, what doesn't. One way to get really good at this is to intentionally go and look for examples of other people who are communicating in a way that you really like. Now, the caveat to this is that it's important to understand that there are different domains of communication. And it is recommended, it is good if you can find examples of different communication styles that you like in different contexts. So for example, is there someone who's really good at public speaking that you like their style, specific to public speaking? Is there someone who's really good at speaking to others one-on-one, who's really good at listening, asking good questions, making the other person feel heard and safe? Emulate that style for one-on-ones, right? There's different domains within communication. Within each one, it's amazing to look for examples of the styles that you like so that you can actually take some of those strategies, techniques, word choice that they're using and implement it for yourself. Play around with it. It might be a little bit tricky at first because, again, it is hard to break a habit and it is hard to step outside of your comfort zone. But when you play around with the things that you like and you don't like, you start to have more freedom with your style and you start to find your own authentic voice. Tip number 2, work on your mindset. Mindset is so important here. If I was to ask you, do you consider yourself to be a speaker? What's the first thing that comes to mind? For most people, it's no. No with hesitation and fear. If you have an underlying mindset that you are not a speaker, it will be very hard for you to do well at speaking. If you have the belief that you're not a public speaker, you're not good at public speaking, guess what? It's going to be really hard for you to do well at public speaking. Working on your mindset is a game changer because even if you don't touch your skills, if you don't touch anything about the actual way that you communicate, but you work on your mindset, naturally there will be shifts in your communication style as well. They go hand in hand. For example, someone who always sounds uncertain, most likely they have underlying beliefs that make them hesitate, that make them nervous, that make them uncertain. And that comes through in your language. If you work on that mindset, if you work on building that confidence, if you work on that self-assurance, that naturally comes through in your tone, your word choice, and your overall communication style. They go hand in hand. Tip number 3, increase your vocabulary. What do I mean by this? Quite literally, learn new words, learn more words. Most of us tend to use the exact same words over and over and over. They become our default vocabulary. Now, this is great because it gives us something to use in the moment. When we're not sure, when we're not certain, we use the words that we're comfortable with. But it restricts you from being able to express yourself clearly or to express yourself well. If your vocabulary is on the smaller side, if you're not as familiar with different adjectives, different words, different nouns that you can use, it becomes harder to articulate yourself and to really express the nuance of what you're trying to say. If something is not going well at work, Am I frustrated, overwhelmed, angry, disappointed, uncertain, right? The more words that I have in my vocabulary, the more clearly I'm able to express exactly what I'm feeling, exactly what I'd like the other person to do, and exactly how to handle the situation while still remaining kind and professional. Now, how do you increase your vocabulary? Great question. Start by taking a look at what you're consuming on a daily basis. The movies that you're watching, the shows that you're listening to, the podcasts, the videos, the books, what you're reading on your phone, all of that contributes to your vocabulary. But then I'm going to challenge you to go one step beyond that. Who are you actually speaking to on a day-to-day basis? And more importantly, what is their vocabulary like? I'm sure you've heard the phrase that you become the sum of the 5 people you're closest to. So does your vocabulary. The words that you hear the people closest to you using, the lingo, the terms, the phrases, slang, anything of that nature, we start to pick that up, we start to adopt it, and we start to use it. So if you're surrounded by individuals who speak more casually, well, you will speak more casually as well. If you are surrounded by individuals who are constantly very serious and professional, you will naturally start to adopt a bit of that as well. So really be mindful of what you're consuming and who you're speaking to on a daily basis, and then supplement it. If you feel like you are having way too many casual interactions, supplement it with something that's a little bit more professional and serious, whether that's podcasts, audiobooks, YouTube videos, whatever the case. Just exposing yourself and listening to that type of language and communication style will automatically start to shift you and your communication as well. Now, tip number 4, talk to more people casually. Now, I've mentioned before in some of my previous episodes, low stakes environments are fantastic when you are starting out. What is a low stakes environment? It's anywhere where you can go out and get live practice speaking to other people, but there's nothing really on the line. And if it doesn't go well, if you start to panic, if you get nervous, you can always leave the situation with no repercussions. So something like a work meeting would not be low stakes. But speaking to someone at the gym or at the grocery store would be a low stakes environment. The more that you're able to step outside of your comfort zone and speak to people live, speak to people that you don't know, speak to people face to face, the better that you will get at it, especially if you can get the reps and the practice in environments where there's not much pressure for you. At a park, at the gym, at the grocery store, at the mall, at a coffee shop, environments like that. But it's getting that practice and getting those reps in that will help you improve. That will also help you improve your communication style and find yourself and your authentic voice. Each of these tips goes hand in hand. Tip number 5, get comfortable with silence. Silence is a superpower, and if you know how to do it well, it will completely transform the way that you communicate with others. Most people feel really uncomfortable with silence. They feel really awkward giving a moment of silence to someone else or asking for a moment of silence when they need to process and think. So silence really goes in both ways. First of all, you need to feel comfortable with silence, with taking up the time and the space and the attention to have silence for yourself. Whether you are thinking, whether you are contemplating something someone said, whatever the case, having that moment of silence does wonders. It's also a sign of confidence to be able to have that silence and not feel compelled to fill it with a filler word like Why do we use filler words? For most people, it's filling in that silence so that it shows the other person you're still thinking and you're going to come back with your response without leaving that dead air in the middle, without having that silence. But again, I'm going to challenge you. Becoming comfortable with silence and taking up the time and the space to have that silence for yourself is a hidden superpower. On the flip side, getting comfortable with having silence for other people without interjecting, without jumping to a response, without feeling compelled to say something just to fill that silence. So if you're having a conversation with someone else and they need a moment to think, give them that space, give them that silence. Being comfortable sitting there waiting for them to answer at their own pace, again, a sign of confidence and a great way to build rapport with others. The more that you're able to do that, and the more that others start to see that you are a good listener and you give them a safe space to process their thoughts without interjecting and feeling the need to fill that space, the better that you will be seen as a communicator. Tip number 6, think of yourself as a speaker. Think of yourself as someone who's good at communication. Because again, going back to your mindset, that's where it all starts. If you spent the next 20 hours of your life learning every single communication strategy that you can get your hands on, but you didn't work on your mindset at all, how practical would those tips be? Not very, because you would not have the confidence, the self-assurance to put most of. Now, the caveat there is that you do need to practice and you do need to learn the right techniques. But again, they go hand in hand. So even if you learn the techniques, until you start to get your identity on board, until you get your mindset behind you, it just won't work as well as you want it to. Okay, it brings us to our final tip. Tip number 7, learn your default nonverbal cues. When starting out and trying to improve communication styles and communication techniques, most people really focus on the actual words that are said and how they say it. But the majority of our communication is nonverbal. So things like our facial expressions and our body language, the way that we feel when we speak, the confidence and the energy that we project, as well as the facial expressions that we make. This alone gives the majority of the context and information to our listeners, especially if you're doing it live, face-to-face. But here's the thing. With the rise of virtual meetings, so much of your nonverbal cues still come through in a virtual setting. It's just limited. It's a lot more confined to your facial expressions and typically the upper half of your body where you're visible on camera. This is important to know because people are still relying on subconscious information like your nonverbal cues when communicating with you. Not being aware of what you are saying with your body and your face detracts from your communication. Because it's not just about what you're saying with your words, it's whether your body language and your facial expressions back it up. Imagine we were in a meeting, you were telling me something important, and I was leaning back, furrowing my brow, crossing my arms. But verbally, I was saying, yep, I agree, you make a good point. Would you believe me? No, because there's too much of a disconnect between what my nonverbals are saying and what my verbals are saying. Most people forget this though. And so that's why it is so important to become aware of what your default nonverbal cues are. Now, what do I mean by default? Just like everything else, your word choice, your communication style, your habits, by now, most of us have fallen into a habit of having certain body language as well as certain facial expressions. For example, when you are working and you're deep in thought, what is the facial expression that you make? That's a great place to get started. Next time, either set up a phone and record yourself or take a picture or ask someone else to take a picture and look at your face when you're deep in thought. In most cases, it's not what we think that we're making. The facial expression that we're making when we're deep in thought doesn't match the face that we think we're making. And that disconnect matters. It doesn't matter what you think you're doing. All that matters with your nonverbals is what other people think, because they are the ones interpreting that information. They are the ones picking up on that information and using it as the basis of their judgment about what you are saying and thinking to them. So if there's a disconnect, that's actually doing you a disservice. Becoming aware of what you actually look like is a crucial first step. But the second step is really getting honest and comfortable and familiar with what your default body language is. Do you tend to slouch? Do you tend to grimace? Do you tend to look away from people or look down because you're perhaps lacking confidence or feeling uncertain? Right? What is your default body language? When you are aware of that, then you can start to get a relatively fair assessment of what other people are seeing and what that makes them think. Then you can work on changing it. But that awareness of what you do automatically is crucial. It is the key for long-lasting change. Okay, to recap, my 7 tips to become better at speaking. Number 1, play around with your communication style. Number 2, focus on getting the right mindset in place. Number 3, work on increasing your vocabulary. And number 4, get comfortable talking to people in different types of settings, but starting with a casual, low-stakes environment. Number 5, get comfortable with the silence. Get comfortable taking on that silence and giving it to others. Number 6, think of yourself as a speaker. Think of yourself as a good communicator. And number 7, get familiar with your nonverbal cues. This may seem like a lot at first, but once you get these basics down, you'll start to see that your communication style completely changes. And it helps you find your authentic voice and build your communicating confidence. Now, as we wrap up today's episode, my 5-letter word for you is magic. Magic. There is no magic cure to becoming a better speaker, but there is magic in doing the right work at the right time for you. Communication is such a vast domain of things, from public speaking to sales to one-on-one interactions to being a leader. Communication changes depending on your style, your context, and your expectations. So although there's no one magic pill to make everyone a better communicator, there are specific things that you can do to get better. And if you do the things, like the 7 tips we've covered today, you will experience success, and then it will feel like magic to you. Okay, that's it for today. See you next time.